Hi, everyone.
Hi, everybody.
Welcome back to the podcast.
Welcome back.
Today, part 2.
Yeah,
Our topic is breaking the rule book.
it sounds like a bit rebellious or something.
I know, I like it,
I
right?
like it. We're going to break the rule book today.
Yeah. So last episode, if you didn't, chime into what we talked about, we were talking about the rule book.
Yeah.
The rule book for chronic pain and symptoms.
And it doesn't have to be, sorry, I'm just going to intersect. It's kind of your own rule book. It doesn't have to be like somebody else's rule book or like messages that we've gotten. It can be informed by that, but it's your rule book.
Yes, everyone's rule book is a little bit different.
Yeah.
And the rule book is made up of behaviors that we do or don't do because we believe they will reduce our chronic pain and symptoms.
Yes. I think we really leaned in last episode to kind of mention that everyone probably has a bit of a rule book. It's just having awareness that it's like, oh, I actually do have these guidelines that dictate my behavior throughout my day.
Mm-hmm. And we really invited everyone, all the listeners last time to, write this out, like write out the rules, because a lot of these, as we said, become unconscious.
Yeah.
In this episode, part 2, we want to discuss how you can rewrite the rules. And this will allow people to have a lot of freedom in their life.
Yeah.
And it will actually cause the brain and nervous system to reduce chronic pain and symptoms.
Yeah, which is really good. And it's like, okay, we write our rule book. We have that awareness that they're there. And now this is kind of the action piece.
Yeah, it's the action of starting to break these rules. And it's not necessarily a really fast process. It depends person to person how it's affected. But when we talk about chronic pain and symptoms, we know a lot of chronic pain and symptoms are neuroplastic.
Yes.
Meaning what's driving this is this survival energy that we're caught in. When the brain and nervous system's in survival mode, we're in a state of fear.
Mm-hmm.
And all the rules we develop are often in a response to fear or fighting against the symptoms.
Right.
That actually can perpetuate and continue to trigger symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
And so as we understand a lot of chronic pain and symptoms are neuroplastic, by starting to rewrite these rules, by breaking some of these rules, it's going to be really healing for a lot of people.
Well, and why do you say that, Tanner? Like, why do you think it's so healing to challenge these?
Well, I know from experience that it is.
Yeah.
I know from experience that as I started to feel safer to approach life, to approach the world, to eat whatever I wanted, to move my body the way I wanted, that was the medicine. That's how I started to heal. Yeah. Is I was teaching my brain that I was safe to do these things.
And so for people, listening or watching, there might be a lot of anxiety or fear of like, well, I have this rule book for a reason, and it is to kind of not flare up my pain. So the thought of like challenging it would, I think for a lot of people, think, okay, my pain will flare.
Yeah.
What happens then?
Yeah, and we're going to get into that because some flares, as you start to break these rules, is really normal. So if you're listening to this, that is a normal aspect.
It's kind of even part of the process for that to happen.
Like I've never seen someone start to rewrite these rules, break these rules, and not have some setbacks along the way.
Well, and I think that's the biggest challenge. Like that's totally what reinforces rules for people is that maybe they manipulate them or go against the grain a little bit, but then the pain comes and they're like, oh no, okay, I need to keep this rule really tightly in place, which is what is that perpetuating cycle.
Exactly, because it's this excessive control. It's this excessive trying to fix it, trying to figure it out. And that raises the level of danger. That's survival energy in your system, and that's going to then produce more symptoms.
Totally.
And so as we know, a lot of we had everyone write them out. Hopefully, if you're listening, you wrote them out. If not, at least hopefully you thought about it.
Yeah.
But the thing to understand here is the rules we set they're often not true. And they're not actually what's preventing the chronic pain or the chronic symptoms. Yeah. They're actually perpetuating it. And as our brain starts to label certain things are safe or dangerous, the more rules we set, the more avoidance behaviors that are taking place, the more in danger the brain actually feels.
Yes.
Now, what you were kind of touching on is people will start to try to break these rules to, maybe start to move their body a little bit more. and they'll get this flare of pain or physical symptoms, fatigue, dizziness, whatever it is that people are dealing with. What's happening is conditioned responses.
Yes. And it's important to have understanding of conditioned responses and that these can occur to almost then understand why the flare is there and then move forward and not react to it.
Yeah, because these conditioned responses, and many of the listeners probably know what this is, but just as a quick review, our brain, it's an association making machine. It does this.
I like
it's
that.
Amazing at it. Like our brain makes associations.
Yeah.
It starts to label certain conditions as either safe or dangerous.
Yes.
And it does this all the time, right?
What's an example of one you had?
An example of one where my brain was clearly making a mistake. It was a mistaken conditioned response, because the conditioned responses aren't always correct. Sometimes it's useful, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, I'll give our cat Harry. This is a conditioned response to Harry. Harry always sits on the bottom of our basement stairs.
Yeah.
And one day I stepped on him and almost fell down the stairs because he's a black cat and it was dark.
Harry,
it was bad for Harry, it was bad for me. But now, so what Harry learned is hey, when Tanner opens that door, I could get hurt.
Right.
Right? Even cats make associations. And so now it's
your
hilarious.
example is Harry's association?
Yeah. I got Harry's association here. And so what happens now is when I go downstairs in the morning and I open the basement door, all three of our cats are sitting on that top stair.
We have a lot of cats.
Yeah, we got a lot of cats. If you're just cluing in, we got a lot of cats. Yeah. But they're all cuddling together. It's quite adorable.
Yeah.
The other two don't move.
Yes.
So I'm stepping around. As soon as I open that door, Harry's down the stairs.
Yes.
He jolts down because he's made this association that there's some type of danger.
So using this example, that makes sense for
100%.
Harry that he'd be okay, I don't want danger. I'm going to leave.
Yeah. Makes
sense.
So
what's wrong with that?
There's nothing wrong with associations. They actually keep us quite safe. The problem is our brain's not perfect. And so when we have chronic pain and symptoms, your brain's making all sorts of associations. All sorts of them. My brain labeled walking as dangerous. Right. And it did. I consciously believed this. When I would walk, my back would hurt. So my brain made that association. When Tanner walks, he gets back in hip pain. The problem is it wasn't the walking.
Right.
All that happened is I happened to be in pain at some point and I started to fear the walking, and then my brain conditioned the two together.
So for Harry, maybe his belief that it was always going to happen kept him avoiding every time.
Yeah. And rightfully so. He's a black cat. It's a dark basement. He should go down the stairs. But with walking, what happened is I avoided walking more and more. It became this real set rule.
Yes.
And what happened is with a lot of these mistaken conditioned responses, my brain labeled walking as dangerous, but walking wasn't actually dangerous.
Yes.
All that was triggering the pain was my brain interpreted danger.
Yes. And this concept has been around for a long time in terms of kind of keeping fear going and anxiety going. So if you think of kind of the basics of anxiety, the more we avoid something, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger in our mind and more dangerous. And so avoiding, and which we think is protecting us, often is making it worse. Yeah. And that's exactly what you're talking about. The more you're avoiding, the fear response grows bigger. And then your pain would happen every time you went towards.
Yeah, it's this avoidance symptom cycle that happens.
Yeah.
Is that the more I avoided walking, the more my brain learned, whoa, there must be something really wrong with walking. Right. Tanner's not doing it. And so the next time I needed to walk a little bit, all of a sudden more pain's triggered. And then there's more avoidance.
Well, and that makes sense because the brain's Tanner, you shouldn't be doing this. What are you doing? Here's some pain to get you to back off.
Yeah. And here's the part of this episode that people aren't going to like very much. To break the rule book, we need to slowly actually start approaching these rules. We need to slowly break them, and we're going to give a process.
To break the rules. That makes sense.
We're gonna give a process of how to do this because this is hard to do. But we do need to start doing that. We need to start giving our brain new experiences that these rules are actually not correct.
Yes.
And that our body is actually capable and able of doing these things.
Yeah.
Or not doing these things. If say you're, if you're doing hot yoga for 2 hours a day trying to prevent, migraines.
Right.
That's something that that's a lot of hot yoga.
Well, I like that you said that actually, because the rule book can be things that we're avoiding. It can also be things that we are doing maybe in excess that we think is helping, but is not. Yeah. Like maybe we are doing hot yoga every day because we're like, this is the solution. Yeah. But it's actually reinforcing.
And so what's happened is again, it's a conditioned response. It's just the brain's now labeled, okay, doing hot yoga for 2 hours a day. Okay, we're safe then. We do that, we're good. It starts to make these associations in the other direction too.
And it's okay to have safety associations. That's part of healing and recovery. Almost creating a new rule book. But we want to make sure that is not driven by fear.
Not driven by fear and doesn't become excessive.
Yeah.
Because then we're just controlling.
Yeah.
And so we're going to dive into this. So, to break the rule book, like we said, we need to start actually breaking our rules. And we need to start breaking our conditioned responses. And we're going to talk about 5 areas that you can start to do this.
Yes.
So I'll list them off first, and then we'll dive into a little bit of detail. Number 1, look for exceptions. Number 2, specific messages of safety.
Yes.
Number 3, nervous system regulation. Number 4, graded exposure. And number 5, pleasant and rewarding.
Yes.
It's a great list.
Okay.
I like lists. We've talked about this on it.
We often do lists. It just helps keep us organized.
It helps keep us organized. And I can be a little scattered, as Anne knows.
He's often scattered.
Sometimes
I keep you organized.
You do keep me organized. Sometimes Anne comes downstairs in the morning. I've been up for an hour and she's like, what has happened? Because it's cupboard doors are open and it's just
it's a disaster.
I got it. I'll be honest with you. We're getting sidetracked here. I got a bit of ADHD. There's some ADHD going on for sure.
No one, if people have been following this podcast for a while, they'd be like, yeah.
They'd be like, yeah.
It's not surprising.
Just we're happy you came to that, Tanner.
Good work, Tanner.
Okay, we're diving into this list.
Yeah, okay.
No side conversations.
So, number 1.
Looking for exceptions. So this is something from pain reprocessing therapy.
Yeah.
A really important skill and technique.
Yes.
And it's not super complicated.
Yeah.
But unless we start to do it, we don't actually find exceptions. And so exceptions are important pieces of evidence for physical safety. So exceptions are when the pain or symptoms don't act like structural damage or disease should.
Yes.
And so really they help us recognize the brain is making a mistake about a potential threat or a conditioned response. And it helps us recognize there's no physical threat. And so really what it's helping us do is understand that the rule itself is incorrect, that we've come to believe is reducing our symptoms in some way.
Is there an example then, Tanner, of this with maybe a rule or
talk about the walking, because we've already talked about it. I was when I was in pain, this was a couple of years in, so I was pretty immobilized at this point. Wasn't walking much. A lot of avoidance, that's for sure. And I had a job interview.
Right.
You probably remember this. I had a job interview. I'd been off work for maybe 3 or 4 months because of my pain. I had this job interview and I was feeling stressed. But one thing about me, not to toot my own horn too much, but when I come under pressure, I usually perform pretty well. 9 times out of 10, I'll perform quite well.
Yeah.
Even though I'm quite anxious. And so I had this job interview and I just killed it. It was great. It was natural. It was very nice. I knew I got the job and I did. And after that I left and it was at the university and I walked around for half an hour and I didn't think about it. Usually I was so on edge, but I was so elated that I just knocked this interview out of the park, that all of a sudden I walked around for half an hour and there was almost no pain. And I remember driving home being my back and hips don't really hurt right now.
Do you remember when you're walking, realizing there's no pain? Or no, like you just were so
It was at the tail end.
In love with it, not in love, but like,
with myself, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But you were so like lost in that you weren't even thinking about your body at the time.
I wasn't really thinking about it until the end. And then I was like, whoa, I've walked a long way.
Yes.
And that's an exception.
Yes.
And that's why you're looking for exceptions, because I reminded myself of that moment so many times when I started to do exposure work.
That's awesome. And I like that you say that you, when you're exposing yourself, reminded yourself of that, because it can, again, be very scary with exposure work, and then scary of maybe like the pain might come on. Yeah. And so it's reminding, maybe there's a possibility that I won't.
Yeah. So, some other examples. Could be sometimes when I do this activity, I feel fine. And other times it hurts or I have symptoms.
Yeah.
Inconsistency, right?
Yeah.
I can do a similar activity and it doesn't cause symptoms. So sometimes it doesn't quite make sense. Like in one setting, I've seen this a lot with people where they can sit at home, relax, hang out, no pain, no symptoms. Yeah. Then all of a sudden they're sitting at work and their back hurts.
Could that be the same as like the chair? Like, because I think that's a common thing where people will talk about this chair is okay, this chair isn't.
Yes, exactly. And that's what we're looking for. It doesn't make sense, physically that's taking place. So that's number one. Everyone look for exceptions. It's very key here. Number 2, specific messages of safety.
Specific. Why do you say specific?
I like the word specific. There's a reason for that. It's very specific. I
just have to note right here how much you're like, I like the word specific.
I know.
In a bit of a weird way
it
here.
It sounded weird when I said it.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I just had to like really, because I bet everyone else felt.
But I know, I'm sorry to the listeners, but we do need to be specific. Like we really do, because we did an episode on cognitive messages of safety a while back, which is an essential part of pain reprocessing therapy, a mind-body approach. But when we talk about specific messages of safety, when we're experiencing a conditioned response based on a rule we've set, the brain has that deep belief that this activity, this stimuli is causing pain or symptoms. And so the conditioned response even can occur without us consciously thinking about it. And so what we need to do is we need to give very consistent messages of safety, reminding ourselves, hey, this is just a rule that I've set. It doesn't actually make sense logically.
Yes.
Or reminding yourself, hey, this is a conditioned response.
And the exception piece, looking for exceptions, can help us believe the message of safety.
Yes. And you can use your exceptions to make the specific messages of safety.
Sure.
So for example, with the walking at the job interview, that was a very clear, specific message of safety I was giving myself every time I engaged in walking.
Yes.
I reminded myself, like, you walked for half an hour when you were happy and excited and you didn't have pain. Yeah. So I know that walking's not actually triggering my pain. Like I was so direct and specific with myself around that. Yeah. And this is it. So you just want to really state clearly as you're starting to break these rules, these specific messages of safety. So we wrote down a few examples. The rule is wrong. This is simply a conditioned response. I know I'm physically safe right now. Yeah. Like I said, I know this activity does not actually damage my body. My brain has just mistakenly understood that this activity causes symptoms. Yes. I'm safe to engage in this movement.
Totally.
And by giving these consistently, we're helping rewire our brain. Yeah. Because a lot of these rules we've set are increasing fear, and they're keeping us stuck in chronic pain, chronic illness. Yeah. And so really specific cognitive messages of safety, they're not the whole deal. Like this is important, but there's other things we need to do as well as we kind of go through this. Number 3, nervous system regulation. Right. One of my favorites. One of my favorite topics.
Yes.
Safety steps happen when we think and feel safe enough while engaging in exposure.
So we need to be working on nervous system regulation with exposure.
Yeah. One thing that we don't want to do is just power through.
No, which is, I think, all of us, lots of people can fall into just powering through.
Yeah.
But that actually sends the opposite of like,
Yeah.
okay, like something is wrong here, or it completely dysregulates the nervous system.
Yeah, I've seen people.
Tanner powers through a lot still. It's just so everyone's working on it.
I'm getting better.
I know, but I just want to be clear that this is a hard thing to change.
It is really hard. We, people with neuroplastic pain and symptoms, we can be an intense group of people. I maybe I'll speak for myself, but from what I've witnessed, we can be an intense group of people. And a lot of people's default is powering through. So what I've seen happen is people will realize, whoa, this is a conditioned response. They'll see all these exceptions. They'll be given those messages of safety. And even as they start engaging in it, they'll have a flare and they just keep pushing.
Yeah, the power through, which I get, which kind of makes sense of like, okay, I'm okay. I know it's a conditioned response, but if we're powering through too much, we might know cognitively, but the nervous system is like, what's going on here?
Yeah, what happens is even though we know cognitively we're safe, we're all of a sudden fighting. We're now in this like fight response, like fighting against our symptoms, being like, I know you're making a mistake, brain, I'm going to power through. Like it creates more of a sense of danger.
And it's not like, again, that thinking isn't bad, but that's why we want to kind of do the exposure work slow.
Mm-hmm. And that's why I always recommend is, with breaking these rules, with breaking conditioned responses, we need to do some type of nervous system regulation.
Yes.
And you don't need to get really fancy. We're not going to dive into this right now, but, even just some breath work. Before I would go and do walks, that's what I would do. I would do some breathing for 15, 20 minutes. And that was really, really beneficial overall.
Well, in some ways, that's almost the opposite of powering through because you're taking a moment. You're slowing down, you're creating that safety. And then hopefully while you're doing the exposure, you're listening to your nervous system and of what it needs.
Yeah, because what we're trying to bring on is we're trying to give people access to this like ventral vagal energy. And what I mean by that, we have a whole episode on Polyvagal theory, but ventral vagal energy is where we feel calm, we feel safe, we feel at ease, socially connected. Your breathing's deep, your heart rate's regulated. And as you engage in the exposure and start to break these rules, it's okay to have some fight or flight energy.
Sure.
It's okay to have some even despair or
right.
or hopelessness. Like that makes sense. Like these kind of like blended states. But we want some of that ventral, safe, connected, calm energy in the mix.
That's right. So and I think that's a really good telltale sign of like, am I just pushing through and creating more dysregulation? Mm-hmm. Or am I kind of regulating that nervous system and creating safety as I go?
Yeah. I'll say it again, I just said it, but if you're struggling with graded exposure work, if you're struggling with breaking these rules, start with some regulation. It can go a long way.
Yes.
That is like one of the main ingredients I included before I started to engage in exposure of actually starting to walk and do things.
And again, back to your example, that regulation can just be 3 deep, long breaths.
Yeah. We don't need to get super fancy here.
Yeah.
You can if you want. I like all the fancy regulation skills.
Yes.
You can check out my YouTube channel. They're all on there. But
but it can be as simple as that of like, okay, I'm going to slow down, do some breathing, listen to my body, be aware of kind of what I'm doing with challenging and breaking this rule, and then move forward.
Yes. Okay, what number are we on? Number 4. Graded exposure.
Right, we've already started touching on that.
We've started touching on this because this is where the kind of meat and potatoes really is around some of this. And so, graded exposure, as we've said, is when you approach something slowly and gradually that you fear. So any rule you've set, that's what we're doing. Now, we won't dive into this topic either, but somatic tracking is a form of exposure we use a lot of the time.
Yeah, for sure. Exposure to the sensations in the body.
100%. But, this is key when rewriting the rules and breaking conditioned responses. We can't heal by avoiding. We got to approach. And we can do it gently, curiously, compassionately, but there needs to be an approaching that takes place. And what we're doing is we're teaching our brain. You're teaching your brain in real time to approach physical sensations, to actually approach movements, activities, the rule that you fear.
Mm-hmm.
And over time, it actually learns, hey, I'm safe. I'm okay.
And again, like we've mentioned before, as we're kind of approaching something that we had rules around, it's normal for pain to maybe come up. And so that's a part of that process.
Yeah. It's knowing that setbacks happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just going to be this like steady decline of symptoms
Yes.
as your physical activity increases. Like there is going to be some bumps.
Mm-hmm.
And like we said, make sure you don't push through too hard and make the steps too big. Because that's what I'll see people do. They make the exposure steps a little bit too big.
Yeah.
And then there's other people that make them too small. They could probably push the line a little more.
Okay, so it's finding that balance.
Yeah, it really is. And so, what we've kind of created for everyone here, and we'll just list this off, is really the exposure kind of process when it comes to condition responses and breaking those rules. And so, I'll list these off just so people have a sense of, how do I go about actually doing this? Because we talk about graded exposure, but again, not everyone knows what that means, and that's okay. And so this is just a general process.
Yes.
Again, it's going to be modified person to person. But, the first step in this is beginning to actually approach or engage in the condition response.
Yes. So having that awareness, noticing it, naming it.
Yeah. Or condition response or breaking the rule.
Mm-hmm.
Either or, but we got to start approaching or engaging it. Start small at first. So for example, with my walking, like 1 or 2 minutes at a time.
Yeah.
Lifting your arm once or twice. Things like doing 1 push-up or 1 sit-up if you want to get back to movement.
Yep.
But small at first. If people are getting dizziness or headaches with screens, you could also, this is another example, you could look at the screen for a minute or 2.
Yeah.
And so then step 2 is noticing what starts to shift in your body with your pain, your symptoms, your emotions, your nervous system state. And so what you do in step 3 is you actually pause the exposure. So you stop doing the approaching or engaging in the activity, and you start to create safety with the pain, symptoms, emotions, nervous system state. And how we do this, and we won't get too complicated here, but we actually start to approach the unpleasant sensations inside. No matter what they are, it doesn't really matter. We actually start to approach them with curiosity, without a desired outcome to make them go away, because we actually want the pain or symptoms to be there at that time.
I feel like sometimes like hearing that might feel hard. Like, no.
It's hard, but that's what we're doing. We're trying to create safety with the pain, symptoms. Maybe you're feeling some fear, frustration, dysregulation. Yeah. Like we want that to come on because that's what we're trying to rewire.
Yeah, so that's right. So that's why it's like, okay, if some symptoms do come on, maybe that's not so bad because now I'm going to work on creating that safety with them.
And this would be the time you'd be giving those specific messages of safety. You could savor any pleasant sensations you feel inside. That can be really essential. And then, in step 4, once regulated, then you begin to approach the condition response or approach breaking that rule again.
Yeah.
So you could do another round. You don't have to, but if you're feeling up for it, after you go through this process, you can kind of repeat the process.
Okay. And so there's something about consistency with this, which is, I always like to point out as it being important that we need to kind of start continue with the exposure. Continue with that exposure, but also keep that exposure going.
Anytime Anne has a chance to say the word consistent.
Well, because I think it's really key. And I think it's something that we don't give enough credit to, the consistency part of rewiring and relearning things.
And, once you've gone through this once and you're ready to approach again, you could increase a little bit.
Yes.
You could walk a little bit more. Right. You could look at the screen a little bit longer.
Yes.
Because that's the goal, is over time, you could do multiple rounds in one sitting and increase a little bit more. But over time, as you do this consistently, you can increase more. That's how I went from walking a couple of minutes to being able to walk an hour within a matter of a couple months, right? That took place for me, but it took a lot of consistent effort. So I'm in agreement. This is not something you're going to do once a week and expect change.
Okay. So that's a really good point.
Yeah. And everyone's different. So I'm cautious to say like a set number because everyone wants like an exact plan, but we don't know your case if you're listening. We don't. And we want to be ethical around that. We don't. And so you're going to have to modify this, but if it's not consistent enough, your brain has all these other experiences that are maybe negative around the pain.
Yeah.
So breaking that rule takes some real consistency. So for myself, what I did with walking is I did it twice a day.
Okay.
I did it twice a day. As it got a little bit longer, I did it maybe once a day.
Yeah.
But I was very consistently practicing this. And I got great results. Yeah. Now, if you have a setback, and I had many setbacks with walking even, I took some days off.
And that's okay. So it's important to kind of like allow time off, allow rest, because you're still listening to your body of like, okay, what does my body need right now? I need to rest.
Yeah.
And then be okay with that too.
Yeah. Yeah. So be flexible for sure. And number 5, pleasant and rewarding.
So when you're approaching kind of these rules, you're doing exposure, how can you bring in pleasant when it can be very hard and scary?
So this is the thing. I always say pair with pleasant. That's what it comes down to. You want to pair with pleasant. That's going to be very essential in some of this.
Yes.
And so when we're pairing with pleasant, this could be while you're engaging in the exposure work, listening to an upbeat playlist or, a comedy show, like a comedy podcast.
Yes.
Like that's used a lot. When I was walking, that was something I did often.
Yeah.
It could be watching a funny or warm-hearted show, for people that are practicing sitting in different places.
Yeah.
That works great, right?
It's funny. I feel like, Tanner, like you, and maybe you weren't doing any exposure in the car, but sometimes Tanner borrows my car and you would always have it to the country channel.
Yeah.
And I at one point I was like, when did Tanner start listening to country music? But you told me, it just makes me feel good and it's light and easy. Yeah. And I imagine that was pairing with pleasant for some way with you.
Yeah, there was something with, I haven't listened to country music in a while, but at the time, I was into some pretty intense, like metal kind of music. It definitely doesn't maybe bring up the happiest emotions.
Right.
And so like there was a lot of laid back, enjoyable, playful country songs that would cultivate that.
Yeah.
Because even sitting while I was driving would cause pain.
Right.
So it could be that. But, the other ways I've seen people do this is just focusing on what feels pleasant inside. Like when you engage in the movement, when you work on breaking that rule, what feels pleasant about the way you're using your body.
Which is a challenge because I think the mind often is like, oh, this is where it hurts or this is where the pain is. So challenging to look at it in a different way.
Yeah. So there's other sensations going on.
Yes.
This could also be things like soothing touch.
Yep.
Like your hand on your chest, wrapping your arms around yourself.
Yeah.
Petting an animal. Having your favorite snack. It's a great one.
I have my special granola bar at night.
Yeah. You have your special, well, you're not breaking condition responses, but you do have your special granola bar. and your tea.
Oh, like I just shared that for no reason, you're saying?
No, you could share that. And it's just like, and share the cheese granola bars at night.
Well, wait, it brings me feelings of joy.
It does.
It's a conditioned response in the other way.
It's like a safety response.
Yes, Tanner.
I like it. No, you were correct.
Thanks
I was wrong.
Yeah.
I was wrong. I apologize.
Don't like
you like your granola
make
bar.
Me feel bad about that.
Hey, the cats also try to eat your granola bar.
They do.
They go at it. Okay.
Anyway, sorry.
We got off track there. We did pretty good on being on track most of the time.
Yeah, okay, you're off track.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. And so just think about this. What are ways you can make it more pleasant, more rewarding, actually engaging in this exposure work? Because the goal, again, is to create safety.
Yes. And so if you're doing it and it's that white knuckling pushing through, well, there's no safety in that.
Yeah.
If it's like, oh, like I know to expose myself and I have to do it, and it's like begrudgingly, there's no safety in that either.
No, exactly. And so you want to try to maximize the chances of your brain feeling safe. And what we're doing is this positive reinforcement, and that helps retrain the brain.
Yes.
So this was our episode.
We hope this was helpful and also a bit like tangible for people to really take these ideas away to start challenging their rule books a little bit.
Yeah, start to break those rules. So in review, we kind of covered 5 main areas of how we go about breaking the rules.
Yes.
So number 1, look for exceptions.
Yes.
Number 2, specific messages of safety. Number 3, nervous system regulation. Number 4, graded exposure. And number 5, pleasant and rewarding.
Yes.
So we appreciate everyone listening. We hope this was very helpful. And we will talk to you all next week.
Talk to you next week.